Hi everyone. I hope you can see my slides okay and you can hear me. Do let me know if there's any problems in seeing or hearing me. We're doing this as a webinar. So if you have any questions or you want to know more, you can use the webinar chat, or you can just put your question and answers into the question and answer link, which you should find on your toolbar below. So I'll get started. So I am Demisha Chow, and I'm the consultant pharmacist in genomic medicine and the pharmacy lead at North Thames Genomic Medicine Service. And today, what I really wanted to do is just launch the community of practice for pharmacogenomics, and just to explain a little bit of what it's about and how you can either get your colleagues involved or how you can get involved as well. So the recording for this will be placed on the North Thames GMS website. So you can always watch it back or share it with others so that you can disseminate that you do have this network of networks of a community of practice, which you can share with your networks. So with that, I'll get started. So for the agenda, I'm going to focus on pharmacogenomics and where we are now and where we want to go in the future. And the focus will be on the pharmacogenomics element of genomic medicine. And then I'll move over to community of practice, so why this is needed, and what we can do within this community of practice kind of network, and then any questions and answers that we may share. So the aim here is, I'm going to try and probably get through this within an hour. I know that we've scheduled an hour and a half of this, but this is only to make sure that we can get through all the question and answers and have time for discussions, and we can go through things without rushing. So where are we now with genomics? So between July 2025 and February 2026, 3 key documents were published, and all had a common theme of improving health outcomes using genomic data. And the focus has been on prevention, risk stratification, and precision medicine, with key initiatives to help drive change, and a new focus very much on population health with an emphasis on pharmacogenomics and polygenic risk scores. And there's also this element of developing a unified genomics record where we can have a central repository and database of genetic information that can interact with other electronic healthcare systems. And also the element of expanding whole genome sequencing. So these are the 3 main documents that came through. There will be others in mental health and cardiovascular in terms of their strategies as well, but I think there will be this key theme of genomic medicine and flowing through all of these new initiatives. So as I said, I'm going to be focusing on pharmacogenomics, and within this 10-year healthcare plan specifically, there were 5 big bets, of which genomics was one of them. And this is the 10-year plan really focuses on, in terms of genetic medicine, the personalized journeys from birth all the way through to adulthood, where we can utilize genomics and predictive analytics for tailored and precise treatment plans for patients where there is a focus on preventative care. Now, pharmacogenomics plays a very big role in this, and within cancer and rare diseases, we are much more familiar with this, particularly in the role of precision medicines or gene therapy. But the focus now is on pharmacogenetics and its use within commonly prescribed medicines, for example, statins, opioid analgesics, proton pump inhibitors, or antidepressants. And pharmacogenomics really fits seamlessly within these 3 strategic shifts, where we have hospital community, where we'll be focusing on the GMS at a neighbourhood healthcare level, so working with our ICB partners, where we can embed genomics and where best it can be placed within pathways. And also around the analog and digital element, where we'll be thinking more at a national level on the unified genomics record and how we can use the NHS app in a more of an agile manner in terms of the genetic data that we can share with patients. Then a huge element of the prevention part is around how we can prevent adverse drug reactions using pharmacogenetics and preventing unnecessary hospital admissions due to an adverse drug reaction. And all of this really does encompass how we can work not only with the NHS in terms of pathways and protocols and governance, etc., but how we can work and liaise with industry partners as well as academia. So what does this mean specifically in terms of the 10-year plan, and what does it say in respects to enabling pharmacogenomics? Well, in the Fit for the Future plan, there are 6 main elements that really become the focus. And the first is the expansion of using the existing NHS Genomic Medicine Service, so how we can create a new genomics population health service and what that would look like from April 2026 moving forward. And then with that is how we can link in at a neighbourhood level or primary care level, particularly when it comes to training at a local level in terms of developing local genomic champions to help increase the uptake of local genomic testing. And through this, with the NHS app on how we can develop a My Medicines tool to support and enable the use of pharmacogenomics to avoid adverse drug reactions, a little bit like a pharmacogenetic passport that can be showcased throughout the NHS and care continuum wherever the patient fits within that pathway. For those that are interested in cancer, there is a huge emphasis on the universal implementation of cancer genomics, where every cancer patient at formal diagnosis or within their treatment pathway will have the chance to have a comprehensive genomic analysis to help guide access to precision treatment therapies or clinical trials where needed. And there's a huge focus on liquid biopsies, particularly to enable early detection and help guide and monitor treatment management across different cancers. Then looking at more at the common health conditions such as cardiovascular diseases or mental health and renal and diabetes, there's this element of expanding whole genome sequencing with focus within these areas, and particularly utilising that adult population level. And through this, how we can utilise pharmacogenetic information and how we can integrate that across routine clinical practice. And this very much focuses on the digital integration where things can become more seamless in the way that we utilise genetic information. So how does this fit in terms of delivery plan? Well, from April 2026, we'll be working in a new way where the North Thames GLH, or the Genomic Laboratory Hub, with the North Thames Genetic Medicine Service Alliance, will come together to form a uniformed or united genomics medicine service. And this is for the 7 other regions as well. And the aim for doing this is to help streamline and deliver genomic medicine services within cancer and rare diseases. But there is a new stream in terms of population health. And we don't quite know what it would look like at the moment, but we do know that pharmacogenetic testing, for example, to prevent adverse drug reactions, will fit within this area. And this will be done through some enabling functions, which will include things such as digital and data integration with different service providers and their systems. But most importantly, the element here is around workforce and education and training in order to support and implement transformational level at service level implementation of pharmacogenetic testing, for example. So what are we doing at the moment over the last few years? Many of you know that we have a National Genomic Test Directory, and we have about 5 pharmacogenetic tests which we do routinely for certain or specific clinical indications, 2 of which are within the cancer area and 2 which are in a very specialised area, for example, CYP2C19 testing for a rare condition called obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So the aim here is to expand pharmacogenetic testing over the next 10 years based on the NHS 10-year plan. We don't know how this will come by, but the focus is very much to expand this. And the thinking is, how do we do this? Because at the moment, we do this for a particular drug and gene, so at a drug-gene level pair. But the focus is now, how do we move on from doing single drug-gene pairs, and how can we make it more comprehensive for individuals and patients? At the moment, in terms of how we're implementing this, we are implementing very much as a test directory based on eligibility criteria, which can be very specific, but we're looking at still at a drug gene level. So if we take the mtRNR gene, for example, which is looking at those that are predisposition for obtaining risk of hearing loss with an aminoglycoside, we are starting to do a lot of work around patient information leaflets. And one that we did here was with the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, how we can implement information through the BNF. So in this case, the MHRA alert has been integrated into the BNF, as well as what's available in the National Test Directory. And then we've been working with providers such as the Specialist Pharmacy Service to help develop implementation guides. All of this is to help enable at a local level the uptake of testing as per the National Test Directory. And these are all national documents. Regionally, we've also developed our best practice recommendation guide on how to implement this particular test at a local level. And this has been utilised really well by some local centres and trusts to implement testing as per the National Test Directory. And we've also done some webinars around this. So everything that we're doing at the moment is focused on a particular gene for a particular drug for a very bespoke conditions. But what can we do next? And this is what the NHS 10-year plan is challenging us to do for enhancing and enabling the use of pharmacogenetic testing more broadly. So as I said, to date, all routine testing is reactive via single gene testing. And so, for example, looking at very specialist medicines. So for those that work in cancer, we do DPYD testing to find out who's at greater risk of side effects for a drug called pyrimidine. But where we want to be within the next 10 years is to do more broad pharmacogenetic testing. So the ones that I've highlighted in green here are the ones that we do and are commissioned by the National Test Directory for NHS England. But we're starting to think about what other tests can we do and how wide should our panel be? So if we have a look at the 4 genes that I've highlighted here in the next bullet points, where we want to be, these genes, CYP2C19, 2D6, SLCO1B1, which is a gene looking at the risk of side effects for statins, and HLA-B looking at risk of hypersensitivity reactions to some anti-epileptic drugs, for example, are responsible for over 95% of all the drug gene interactions that we observe in primary care, utilising commonly prescribed medicines that we see, such as clopidogrel, statins, proton pump inhibitors, antidepressants, and even opioid analgesics. So we started to ask the question, is it more cost effective to do panel testing than single gene testing? And how do we do this? So within the NHS, there is a networks of excellence for pharmacogenomics. And within that particular network, there is a clinical trial called the Progress Study. And they've been looking at this very question of panel testing. And here they've picked out 4 genes, CYP2C19, 2D6, 2C9, and SLCO1B1. And they've recruited over 1,300 patients across 21 sites across England. And they identified that 91% of those patients that were recruited had a clinically actionable variant, which means that some change of their drug is required. And about 10% had a red flag recommendation advising a change in their treatment. And based on that recommendation, up to 90% of the guidance that was returned to prescribers was followed by the healthcare professionals. And all of this pathway took around from the point where the blood is, or the saliva sample is taken, and when the results are available, takes around about 7 to 10 days. So this particular study has shown that it is possible to do. And they're actually looking at the healthcare economics around this in terms of how that can be implemented at scale through GP practices throughout the primary care sector. So this is one NHS-backed project, but how do we make it more wider, and how can this be implemented at scale across England? And these are the challenges that we are looking at through the GMSs and through the genomics unit, through other industry partners as well, which are collaborating at an NHS organisational level. And some of these components have to be done at a national level. So, for example, the testing and laboratory infrastructure, for example. But also there's questions around how we deliver that service for panel testing within the next 10 years. And what do those decision support tools look like? How is it cost effective? What's the affordability of this? including the digital and data infrastructure at the moment. As we know, our electronic systems don't always talk to each other, and how can that be utilised using this new genomics, unified genomics record that is being developed by NHS England. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the key questions that are being asked is, do we continue with this reactive approach where we prescribe a drug and then we ask for the test to be done, which is what we are doing at the moment with the genes that we have in the National Test Directory? Or do we follow the progress example where we do more preemptive testing for patients and then reuse the results during the patient's lifetime? And how does that work across the continuum? Now, a lot of work has been done, a lot of milestones have been reached, and I think the ones that I will go through would be around the guideline development, because this is what we're interested in. If we have a test, how do we utilise the medicines, and how do we prescribe, what UK guidelines are available? And most importantly, the workforce implications around education training. So some are experts in pharmacogenomics, but they're very few and far between. But many of them are new to pharmacogenomics, and what training do we need to provide? So a lot of work has been done in this area. We've had a lot of engagement with the last few years with our acute centres, specialists in tertiary care, healthcare professionals. But we now very much want to work through at a neighbourhood level, very much engaging through community care and primary care. And this will take collaborations and working with local networks such as ICBs. So I'm going to focus on the guideline development first and then walk through what we have in terms of workforce implications and education training needs, and then move on why we need a North Thames community of practice approach for pharmacogenomics and how you can get involved. So in terms of guideline development, some new things that have happened and have progressed really rapidly is this organisational body here called Centre of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation in Pharmacogenomics, abbreviated to CPGX. And this has been a really great group which has brought together academia, industry and regulators. And they have a number of work packages in place. And these work packages include public and patient engagement, education training, health economics, pharmacogenomics, but most importantly, developing UK-based guidelines. And this is the one that I've been involved with. And recently they have published a UK-based guidelines for CYP2C19 testing for clopidogrel. And this guideline is really unique in the sense that not only does it give advice around how to prescribe clopidogrel based on different patients' pharmacogenetic results, for example, sons of poor metabolizer versus a normal metabolizer, but it also gives guidance around the governance and the implementation elements of pharmacogenomic testing for this particular gene. And it's very UK specific, which makes it unique in that sense. And so in readiness, certain guidelines are being developed. And in the future, we will see soon that within the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology, where these guidelines will be published, we will see that UGT1 within TCAM will be published. There'll be a gene for ACKR1 clozapine being published, and also HLA guidelines being published for anti-epileptic drugs. So you will see that we'll have a body of UK-based guidelines. Wonderfully, in the last month, the UK or Clinical Pharmacy Association have developed a handbook of pharmacogenomics, and they've developed monographs on drugs which have a drug gene pairing, and it's similar to the renal drug handbook, if any of you have used that, but it works out as short monographs that can be utilised within a busy clinical environment, and it provides information for certain drugs and their pharmacogenomic guidance. So again, a lot of work is being done around being prepared and ready for when the pharmacogenetic testing becomes more prominent and more wider when it comes to commonly prescribed medications. In terms of education and training, there is a lot of work that's being done with respect to competency-based training. And one of these, which was launched yesterday, in fact, was a pharmacogenomics resource for prescribers, setting out a list of competencies that people will need to work by in terms and be able to understand in terms of how to prescribe drugs based on a pharmacogenetic report. So There are systems in place to help us, one, provide education and training, and the second, UK guidance. So while we're waiting for the infrastructure, a lot of resources are being developed. Interestingly, there's also been some guidance developed at a national level on direct-to-consumer testing. So while we are waiting for the NHS to develop more panel-based testing, a lot of pharmaceutical companies or corporate companies have developed direct-to-consumer testing that patients can buy online. And these companies maybe give healthcare professionals some confusion on whether to use a test or not. And these particular guidance here is really short and really quick to read, but it gives key recommendations on what a healthcare professional should do with a direct-to-consumer test, particularly if a pharmacogenetic result is being reported. There's also been some other guidance. So the Royal College of General Practitioners have produced a position statement of CYP2C19 testing. So this particular test is done on the NHS for the drug mavacamten for the cardiomyopathy that I mentioned earlier, very bespoke clinical area. But it's also being utilised in some centres for CYP2C19 testing for clopidogrel at some pilot sites. And so this particular position statement helps set out what a clinician will need to look into in terms of how this particular drug gene pair can impact other drugs such as proton pump inhibitors and antidepressants, and what clinicians will need to know. So there's some really good useful resources out there that's available. There's also a lot of work in general around genomic medicine, around the equity and the uptake of testing, and something that we need to be aware of around pharmacogenomics is the unmet need when it comes to the data that's available, which is predominantly within the European Caucasian populations. And within North Thames, our region is very diverse, and sometimes the evidence that we have does not translate to some of the populations that we have within the region that we are serving. So a lot of work is being done to help address these research gaps, some through the networks of excellence that the NHS has funded, some through clinical studies, but there's still some understanding that needs to be done at a local level about the understandable limitations of genetic testing and how we can recruit patients into clinical trials, but also how we can disseminate information across different routes. Within North Thames GMS, in collaboration with the NHS Race and Health Observatory, the team is developing online resources around genomic medicines, which will include pharmacogenetics to help tackle some inequalities. And this piece of work will be looking at developing resources developed with and by the public to give information about the limitations of testing and how to engage with NHS providers to have genetic testing where uptake of testing isn't so great in certain populations. So this work is ongoing, it's just recently started. But within the community of practice, this is something that, if you are interested, that we could get people involved with to help develop resources. We also have our own equity strategy pillar that we work towards, and the community of practice that we're developing will be no different. We have the usual things that we will see around the equity, around research and service design, but also around workforce. But there is a huge focus around the community element when it comes to equity, and how one of the key questions is to understand how we can work at a neighbourhood level to help create more collaboratively resources to help address some of these questions that our patient and publics may have. And so the work that we'll be doing will be following these pillars, and also we'll be linking in with some of the work with Race and Health Observatory as well, and very much focused on that neighbourhood level training. There is also a lot of work at a national level, and you may have heard about G-Notes, and this is about creating just-in-time resources, and there's a lot of education and training packages that are being done by Genomics Education Programme as well. But we do know that there is some information or education training that is still needed, particularly where people don't want to do formal genomics training in terms of a taught programme. And so within these community of practice, and particularly what we would want to achieve is create some elements of developing workshops to help increase awareness about pharmacogenetic testing, or linking with other national programmes where pharmacogenetic testing can education training resource can be tapped into. So, for example, the Northwest GMSA later in the year will be hosting a 3-day workshop event for those new to pharmacogenomics. And so one of these things that the community of practice will be doing is linking you into some of these education training resources that you can attend to help improve your understanding, awareness, and CPD within certain areas. Regionally, we also have our own pharmacogenomics education and training page. We have done face-to-face workshops on pharmacogenetic testing. We've got some podcasts around genomic medicine, and this is episode which focuses on pharmacogenetic testing. But we've also done some webinars as well, and we've done some walkthrough videos about how to navigate a pharmacogenetic report. So all of these here resources are available for you to explore. But what we want to do is start putting everything together and develop in a way where we can move as a community of practice with other healthcare professionals at a multidisciplinary level to, one, increase our awareness of pharmacogenetic testing, but also serves as a way of how the GMS can link in with local providers. So in summary, there is a really strong commitment within the NHS 10-year plan for the expansion of NHS genomic medicine services, with a real big focus on population health and working with local providers, particularly at a primary care level and neighbourhood level. And one of the things that they want to do is, in terms of population health, though it's still being defined, it does include the element that within the next 10 years, we want to start working on preemptive pharmacogenetic testing and profile. National work is very much underway to support and enable pharmacogenomic implementation from the medium to long term. A lot of this is around workforce development, of which I've explained is being done at a national and a regional level. But also there's been a lot of work around UK consensus and regulatory guidance as well, which is being done, as you've seen with the UK, with the CERSI PGX work, developing UK-based pharmacogenetic guidelines. The regional and a national level, we really want to focus on education and training. At the moment, it's been very pharmacy focused, which is great, but we do, with this community of practice approach, move to a more multidisciplinary approach, especially in relation to certain pathways. And in the future, we want to develop more trainer-trainer resources, or tap into where you can have trainer-trainer resources at a national level, so that you can be empowered to teach others at a local level. So there is a lot happening. And this, with all of this coming together from the work that's been done in the last few years, I think now, as a time as we move into the new financial year, is where we can start putting together our North Thames Pharmacogenomics community of practice for you all to engage with. So I hope that gives you kind of a bit of a summary of where we are now and what we want to do in the future. So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions and answers I can go to. If you do have any questions, please type in. The next webinar will be more interactive. I think this is more about information given and where we are at the moment and how to get involved. So if you do have any questions, please type them in. Otherwise, I will keep going. So, in terms of the community of practice, so the North Thames GMS at the moment, we have a pharmacy champion network, and though it has worked really well over the last 4 years, we feel that now is the time to do something a little bit different. And this particular pharmacogenomics community of practice, what we want is it to be more multidisciplinary and include more healthcare professionals from a primary care level and those in the future who see their place working at a neighbourhood level. So why do we need a community practice approach, and why now? So within the GMS, we are really aiming to pivot from science of genomics to the logistics of NHS healthcare delivery. And we really want to move from awareness to readiness. Firstly, by bridging the specialist to generalist gap. The second, where we can standardise pathways and governance, so really building in equity of access into our pathways. And we really do want to scale the education that we can provide through developing local champions, where we can empower others to start teaching others about access to testing. and where we can also help support operational efficiency. And then in the future, over the next few years, then build real world evidence as more pharmacogenetic testing comes into play. So what is the goal of pharmacogenomics community practice, and why do we want to do this now? So this pharmacogenomics community practice will focus on how pharmacogenomics can be implemented equitably across clinical settings. And this will include precision medicines, ATMPs, and pharmacogenetics as well. So the intention for this is to cover the North Thames geographical footprint, and we want it to be an active platform and to function as a collaborative space. The overall goal here is really to strengthen the understanding and application of pharmacogenomics by creating a collaborative platform where we want to share best practice, very much upskill the multidisciplinary workforce is one of our key objectives, and also very much to have an active platform we can foster collaboration and co-develop resources, whether it's at a national level or at a regional level. And all of this is just to underpin that we want to ensure that we can enable timely access to innovative treatments and clinical pathways. So who can join this community of practice? Well, it's pretty much anyone. I've listed loads of healthcare professionals here, but it's not it's a non-exhaustive list. But we do get a lot of engagement from the hospital sector. So if what we're trying to do now is to have a similar engagement across the community spectrum and the primary care networks, GPs, as well as those nurses working within a community level as well. So if you know anyone who's interested, I think please do share this community practice network with them. And we still want hospital pharmacists to attend and as well and be part of this, because there's a lot of shared learning from the hospital sector to primary care as well, particularly around data transfer, which is really important as we do more and more pharmacogenetic testing. So what are the expectations? So if you do choose to be a community of practice member, there'll be the expectations to attend a biannual meeting, which is where we'll provide some pharmacogenomic updates, and we'll also focus on key elements such as pathways, the governance or the ethics of some pharmacogenomic testing and what we want to do, particularly around elements of where we can work with system leaders and who needs to be aware and make sure we have the right people at the table, or where I need to be at a certain table in order to support pharmacogenomic testing. So these meetings will be those who are community of practice members only, and there'll be some pieces of work that may be more specific to a particular clinical area, and this is where we'd probably siphon off some healthcare professionals to be working within a specialist work stream. So an example is if a particular pharmacogenetic test becomes available for a drug, clozapine that's used in psychosis, that may need a specialist work stream in order to ensure that we have the equitable uptake for that particular drug gene pair. So the framework in terms of the ongoing development is that these biannual meetings that we have in March and October will be supplemented with other things such as CPD sessions or learning at lunch sessions. And these could be tapping into regional sessions or even national learning at lunch sessions, for example. We'll do journal clubs, so we'll have some workshops which can be face-to-face or online. And we'll also be producing newsletters to provide any updates that happen before these biannual meetings. And these can then be shared with your networks so that you can disseminate the role of pharmacogenetic testing or pharmacogenomic medicine to others. So in the first year, in this financial year, what we're trying to do is very much grow the community of practice, get people engaged and build engagements across different healthcare sectors, and where needed to really establish where learning is required, so building pharmacogenomic fundamentals to advance practice. As I said, we want this community of practice to be very multidisciplinary, so we want to consider patient and public involvement, and we do have a public and patient involvement group within North Thames, but we can always include others as well from different organisations where it's necessary or needed. And through this, any objectives that we do, any piece of work, the role of equity will always be intertwined within that. Within the future, there is a national programme around developing genomics-informed medicines optimization champions, which is a bit of a mouthful, but these champions will be able to link in with some national education training programs, and they will be able to work at a local level to start teaching others on how to undertake pharmacogenetic testing, whether it be to implement it or educate patients or other healthcare professionals. And so this is something that's coming in the future, but I think it gives the ability for this group to be quite dynamic. And so if you are a member of this particular community of practice, you don't have to be a champion. It's more like engaging with others to see whether people that you work within your networks would want to be champions, and then linking them in with the right people to get that education and training in place for them so they can be able to do their role. So for example, if there's a particular genetic therapy that's coming into play that requires a particular test that has to be available within pathways quickly, we can work with those champions to ensure that we have equitable testing in a timely manner. So what input would we require from a community of practice members? So we want this to be a two-way conversation. So the first thing would be that from you, I'll be asking how you, in terms of the strategic advice on how we can develop new testing to local regional pathways, or where there is a test already, where things aren't working so well, where you can then highlight in the areas of concern, and then we as a GMS can help support and provide the resources or tools, or even work with our labs to make sure that we can address any of those concerns. We may ask you or to help to contribute to any governance or implementation work, particularly where some regional outputs are needed, and where needed in the future to support with some local or real world data collection in the future where we might need that information. But where also we can also utilize this pharmacogenetics community of practice is where we can then help develop a specific work stream. So for example, if CYP2C19 testing does come into play and becomes commissioned for stroke or other cardiovascular diseases, that may need its own work stream, and then we can work with people that you know within the cardiovascular community to then support the uptake and implementation of that testing, or where it may be best for me to work with other ICB leads. So I think the role here is to have a really dynamic conversation with people and to ask you to actively contribute as well over the coming years. And so if this is something that you are interested in, it'd be really great to have you on board. And if you know of others who may be interested, it'll be really great to share this piece of work with this community of practice with them, and this webinar link when it becomes available with them, so that they can understand what the outputs and what we are looking for our community of practice member. So I'll just pause there to see if there's any questions. Do feel free to ask questions. I'll have my email address at the end as well, so that you can email me if you have anything. But what I'll do is I will stop there and pause. Yeah, any questions? Okay. So what I'll do now is I'm going to provide a couple of examples of the kind of updates that we'll be providing as part of community of practice members, so you can get an idea of what information I'll be giving out and how you can become involved. And if you're interested, where you can get more information.